So I think you're all pretty well aware of some of the extreme conditions and their effect on orchard production systems. And on this slide here, I've tried to capture what those events actually are and the impact they have on horticultural production. And there's a whole range of things that obviously impact, and it's a pretty difficult business to be in when you're faced with so many of these potential events and the impact they can have. What I'll do for the rest of this talk is try to present some of the management options, adaptation, in other words, to these sorts of events, and in other words, trying to reduce their impacts. I'll probably focus more on the last two there about some of the work we've been doing with respect to adaptation for extreme heat events, and also the sort of a lot of historical work that we've done here at Tatura on irrigation management when we've got obviously low irrigation allocations. And that photo down there on the left is a reminder of that's the Hume Reservoir in 2007, and I think it was at about 7%. And if you remember, the initial allocation was 0, and that I think in 2008 it went up to a maximum of 33%. So those severe drought conditions will occur again, of course. So first of all, just some, these are the first series of slides are pretty general, and I thought it was probably good to just remind us of the importance of mounding up rows, mounding up the soil in orchards to get surface drainage. The key is really that surface drainage during high rainfall events. Mounding's not going to stop a flood event where you can't control flood water coming into an orchard, but it definitely is going to improve that surface drainage and prevent waterlogging from extremely high rainfall events, which did occur obviously last spring. And I've also got a couple of slides up there of the community drainage scheme that's in this region that was put in during a series of obviously wet years in the 90s. And it does serve its purposes, as was shown in spring last year. Sure, the outfall from the community drains go into the river, and if the river floods, then that's a problem because it doesn't have anywhere to go. But it can handle some pretty high localised rainfall events to get rid of that water. Yeah, and I've got up there spinner cuts too. So I remember in the 90s there was a lot of people using laser guided spinner cuts in orchards to get down the middle of the row to get rid of water that might be lying around, and I think that's sort of when you have 10 years of drought, those sort of things go a little bit AWOL and out of favour, and people who are contractors go out of business. But at any rate, I better keep moving because Amy will be on me hammer. So with respect to fruit splitting, I showed on the previous slide obviously some cherries, but things like Cripps Pink Lady cultivars, they'll crack as well when we get very high rainfall events. So there are really good advances now in rain covers where they're woven into a netting to give them better support and stopping them flapping around everywhere. And they also have this sort of ventilation system where heat that accumulates from the plastic, of course, up the top, can be vented out. And as seen on that slide on your right, they're retractable. They're retractable as well. Hail events. So obviously netting's the key for preventing hail damage. The 22nd last year, 22nd of December, we had a significant hail event here at Tatura that went on a northeast direction through Ardmona and then over into Bunbartha. And so obviously, hail, obviously the netting is pretty much a secure way of preventing hail damage. But you can see from that slide there that the gable system is a lot more effective at shedding that netting as opposed to the flat type top netting systems that do accumulate hail and can get quite severely, damaged from the hail accumulating and sagging and ripping the netting. I've got on the slide there on the right, in our agrivoltaics experiment here at Tatura, we did show a reduction in hail damage under the solar panels. It wasn't equivalent to what protection you get from netting, but it did reduce the damage. Frost events, so frost fans have really probably the most common way of trying to reduce the effect of frost, whether they're portable fans or a stationary permanent fixed fan. The idea of them, of course, is to mix the warmer air that's below the inversion layer with colder air towards the soil surface. A lot of situations around the world can't use frost fans because it's not a radiation frost. You don't have that inversion layer, but most of our frosts, or nearly all of them, are radiation frosts, so they do work quite effectively. The middle photo there is of microjet system running, so the aim with any is to try to get the understory managed so that you can absorb a lot of heat during the daytime, a lot of radiation from the sun to heat up the soil, and if that soil's moist, it'll absorb more heat, which can then get re-radiated at night. And of course, there's an image there of overhead irrigation, frost control from the United States. The issue with using overhead irrigation in this part of the world is, of course, it uses water. Water is a key input that's in short supply. The amount of water that you have to apply, you've got to keep ice. During a frost, you have to have ice forming on the wood or on the leaves because it's that ice that's forming that maintains the temperature of the tissue just below zero. So it's really critical that the overhead irrigation is kept running during a frost event, because otherwise, if you turn it off, the temperature of the tissue will actually plummet. So ice forming from the irrigation is a good thing, but it needs to keep on going. And the last slide over there is a fogging machine, and the fogging is something that I don't know too many people using fogging machines, but the idea is to blanket the orchard with fog and do it in the evening to prevent the loss of heat over the nighttime period. So it's not applied in the early hours of the morning, during if the fog lifts, of course, you'd have to reapply it, but the aim is to try to blanket the loss of heat from the soil. So labour I put up there is an issue with respect to heat events. So getting happy workers is probably a key component of any business nowadays, and people are a bit allergic to working outside during hot weather. So the concept of using platform harvesters for workers to be more comfortable when they're picking is a mechanism to overcome that issue. And of course, one day we'll probably have robotic harvesters, although we've still got a way to go, but there's a lot of work going on at the moment with robotic harvesting. So chilling, so lack of chill because of warm winters, and predictions are that that's going to continue to be, with climate change, is going to be a problem in this region. So at the moment, really the only solutions are dormancy breaking sprays, and of course those dormancy breaking sprays, the emphasis is on making sure that they're applied at the right time, which is after the buds have actually accumulated enough chill to break. So they're really impacting on that accumulation of heat for flowering. That's when these dormancy breakings are having an impact. And the idea, of course, is so that you get even flowering and you get synchronisation with pollinisers. And with respect to sunburn, I'll talk a little bit more about evaporative cooling and netting in the next few slides, but I just am showing here the other option for preventing sunburn is spray on protectants, and the white kaolinite-based products have gone out of favour, and mainly because they'll the residues that they leave on the fruit are difficult to remove, and obviously that's a consumer is going to object to seeing any white powder on a piece of fruit in the supermarket for obvious reasons. With respect to evaporative cooling, we did quite a lot of work a few years ago now, but it's still quite relevant, where you're deliberately applying overhead irrigation and overhead watering system to cool the fruit, and what we did in those experiments was measured the fruit surface temperature. So this is a thermocouple up here that's sticking in just under the skin of the fruit to measure that temperature of the fruit. And this graph here is showing some data from that fruit surface temperature. And on the figure, there's two lines here. There's a dark brown line and an orange line. They're the two thresholds as to when you'll get sunburn damage. The lower one is sunburn browning, and this one here is sunburn necrosis, the blackening of the fruit. So they're the fruit skin temperatures, in other words, about 46 degrees and 52 degree, when you'll get the fruit suffer from those sunburn browning and sunburn necrosis. So this blue line here is the fruit surface temperature without any evaporative cooling. The black line is our air temperature, and the green line, the fruit surface temperature when we're using evaporative cooling. And so you'll note from this, it's a sawtooth here, and the reason for that is that it's actually being pulsed. So it's about 15 minutes on and 15 minutes off, or actually I think it was about 10 minutes on and 15 off, but it was along that sort of time frame of pulsing the irrigation. You can see that the fruit surface temperatures well and truly drop quite low when the irrigation's being applied, the overhead irrigation, and obviously there's water on the surface of the fruit, and the mechanism, of course, is its evaporation. The water's being evaporated from the skin and cooling the fruit. So you get this sawtooth, of when it's on, when it's obviously dropping, and then you turn it off and it goes back up. But it's definitely maintaining the fruit surface temperature well below that which causes damage. So. And of course, the reason why we're doing this pulsing was to try to minimise the amount of water that was being applied. Some other work we've been doing with respect to netting, the effects on fruit surface temperature. So this is our thermocouple sticking in a gala, and what we did was measure fruit surface temperature underneath a netted orchard and then outside the orchard, and then compared those measurements with air temperature. We know those thresholds, the 46 degrees or thereabouts for sunburn browning and 52 for necrosis. So we related air temperature to the measurements we were taking of fruit surface temperature, and we came up with these are air temperatures as to when we were getting sunburn browning, or when you would get sunburn browning, and when you'd get necrosis. So, in a non-netted orchard, on average, 34 degree air temperature day, we start to see some sunburn browning, and then necrosis was when we get air temperatures about 37.9 degrees. Whereas, of course, with netting, we had to get air temperatures up around this before you'd start getting to those thresholds for browning. And when we did this study, we never got any fruit surface temperatures under the netting that would lead to necrosis. So what we did is then, of course, picked up on some climate change models to try to look at, for different apple growing districts around Australia, and this particular graph is for Tatura, the number of days of so-called browning risk days. So this is historically in an unnetted and a netted orchard. So you can see that there's on average 6 days we're likely to get sunburn browning. On average is this long-term average historical data. if you're in a netted orchard, there'd be 2 days, right? And so this is projected based on those climate change models as to what might happen into future climates. So from 2030, 2030 is getting closer and closer, isn't it? Because we did this work back in 2015, so we're more than halfway there. 2050 and 2090, and of course you can see, you know, the dramatic increase in the number of days of browning risks around here, and you'll still get the under netting in terms of browning, sunburn browning, into the future. Pardon? Yep. So the other adaptation is through foliage cover, and you'll see the sundial orchard today, and one of the objectives of that was to see if we could reduce sunburn damage, and in combination with rootstocks. I better wriggle along, hey Amy. With respect to irrigation, so as I said, we did a lot of work historically, and this is some of the results from both field observations as well as some modelling work. But basically, going from microjet to drip, you know, you'll get a 20 to 25% saving in irrigation. Classical RDI, this is for stone fruit, where you're applying water deficits during this period of rapid shoot growth and slow fruit growth. Again, you know, calculations and observation showed roughly a 20 to 25% water saving. And then post-harvest as well, we did quite a work of looking at the water saving from post-harvest water deficits. I won't go into the detail of those numbers now. And with respect to apples, is something that we wouldn't recommend. Well, if you apply RDI on apples, you will get loss in fruit size and yield. It doesn't have that distinctive growth phases like peaches and even for that matter in pears. And so that's what this figure here is showing, that if you start dropping your irrigation below crop water requirement, you'll start to get a reduction in yield. Of course, if you go above it, it's just plateaued. But some interesting work has been done, and we've never replicated this work, but it was a great study in Israel where they looked at crop thinning and water deficits. And the bottom line is that, you know, by thinning a crop pretty heavily, you can still get a target fruit size, not maximum fruit size, but a target fruit size where the fruit is still marketable with lower irrigation applications. And I'll just end on this slide here, which is a new website. We haven't had anything to do with it, but it's been developed by CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology, and it's climate services for agriculture, and it's basically providing, in this particular case, I've selected Tatura, and it's climate information for apple, and you can click on various projections into the future as well as historical, and see, you know, what impact future climates, historical as well as future climates, might be having on things like sun damage and winter chill were two that I've picked up on. And, you know, this figure here this is actually historical data showing temperature data where, you know, days that are temperature maximum is exceeding 32 degrees Celsius. You can see this jump up over the last 20, well, that's more than 20 years, isn't it? It's 20 years from 30 years from there, and 30 years previous to that. But anyway, it's quite an interesting website to have a look at some of the projections for climate data.